in this neighborhood for over a decade. My home sits on a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall privacy hedges that I planted myself. Those hedges aren't just decorative, they're a barrier, a sanctuary, a slice of peace in a world that seems determined to invade personal space. I like my privacy. I like my quiet. And apparently HOA Karen did not. Karen moved into the neighborhood a few years back, clipboard always in hand, a permanent scowl on her face, and a sense of entitlement so thick it could be cut with a lawnmower. From the start, she seemed obsessed with control. Rules, she said. Compliance. Standards. All words she loved more than human decency. At first, it was little things. Complaints about my mailbox, my paint color, my landscaping. I smiled politely, corrected minor issues, but mostly ignored her obsessive inspections. My hedges, however, became her obsession. They were too tall, too dense, too unregulated in her eyes. And that obsession would soon explode into full-blown conflict. One sunny morning, I stepped outside to enjoy a cup of coffee and the peace of my yard, and that peace was shattered. My hedges gone. She had cut them down. Every last one. Perfectly, cleanly, as if a machine had passed over them. I stood in the empty space, disbelief and anger mixing in a cocktail I wasn't sure I could swallow politely. Attached to the hedge remnants was a note. In perfect HOA legalese, it declared my hedges a violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards and demanded I remove all remaining non-compliant growth or face fines. My sanctuary destroyed, and the arrogance of Karen shining in ink. I brewed another cup of coffee and stared at the barren line of dirt where my hedges once stood. I thought about calling the HOA. I thought about calling the police. I thought about smiling and pretending this wasn't a personal attack. And then I realized Karen had made a critical mistake. She assumed I would submit. She didn't know me. The morning after I discovered my hedges were gone, I was already planning my response. But first, I had to deal with Karen herself. Of course, she didn't knock politely. She didn't leave another note. She showed up at my door, heels clacking, clipboard in hand, and a smug smile like she had just won the lottery. "Good morning," she chirped, as if greeting me could erase her crime. "I see you've received our notice. It's very important to comply with HOA standards immediately."
Ist sehr daher.
"You mean the hedges you cut down?" Her smile didn't falter. "We're just enforcing community rules. Everyone must adhere to them. You know, property aesthetics, safety, compliance." I couldn't help laughing. A cold, deliberate laugh. Safety. Compliance. "Karen, you just trespassed and mutilated my property. That's not safety. It's assault on greenery." She flinched slightly, but recovered quickly. "That's not the tone we expect from residents. I could escalate this. Escalate." I echoed, leaning casually against my doorframe. "You just escalated by hacking down my hedges. You have no authority here." Her eyes flicked to the now barren line of dirt where my hedge fortress had once stood. I could see the tiny flicker of doubt, quickly replaced by defiance. "The HOA's rules," she said firmly. "Rules are rules." I smiled. This was exactly what I had expected. Karen thrived on rules. That meant one thing. She underestimated creativity. And vengeance. I turned back to my yard, already imagining a solution. Hedges were delicate, bendable, removable, and apparently disposable by anyone with a pair of shears. But cinder blocks. Heavy. Solid.
Permanent.
Impenetrable. A fortress. And that's when the plan formed. Karen could cut down my shrubs, but she could not stop me from reclaiming my property and from sending a message she would never forget. I spent that evening pacing my yard, coffee in hand, staring at the barren line where my beloved hedges had once stood. I replayed Karen's smug little grin in my head and realized something. This wasn't just about hedges. This was about boundaries, respect, and, frankly, justice. Hedges were too fragile. They could be cut, trimmed, or stolen. But a cinder block wall, that was permanent, solid, immovable, a statement, and it would come with flair. I started sketching ideas on an old notepad. The wall couldn't just be a plain barrier. It had to be intimidating. I envisioned a fortress, complete with staggered heights, a small observation window near the driveway, and heavy iron gates. If Karen or any other HOA busybody dared approach, they would see a structure that said, "Back off. This is private property." The next day, I visited the local hardware store, hauling lists of cement, blocks, rebar, and gravel. I could already see the looks on the store clerks' faces as I piled my cart sky-high. "Building, a wall," I said vaguely when they asked. I didn't need to explain. Sometimes words aren't necessary, just supplies and a determined glare. Back at home, I started the groundwork. I measured, leveled, and dug trenches deep enough to hold the foundation steady. Every block I laid felt like a small victory, a quiet retaliation against Karen's audacity. My hands were blistered, my back ached, but I didn't care. Each cemented layer was a reminder. This property was mine, and no clipboard-wielding tyrant was taking it from me. Neighbors began to peek over fences, whispering to each other. Some chuckled, some shook their heads. A few even brought me iced tea and sandwiches, secretly cheering me on. Karen, of course, was oblivious at first. She sent emails and letters, complaining about construction without permits and aesthetic violations, as if she had authority over a fortress rising in plain sight. I didn't respond to her. I didn't have to. The wall spoke for me. Every block was a statement. Every reinforced corner was a warning. By the time the first tier was laid, I could almost hear Karen's rage building from her perfectly landscaped yard down the street. By the end of the first week, my fortress began to take shape. It wasn't just a wall. It was an edifice of justice, a monument to personal space, and a subtle, brick-and-mortar Karen deterrent. That night, I sat on the porch with a cold drink, staring at the half-finished fortress. I couldn't stop smiling. Karen had underestimated me, underestimated my patience, and underestimated my determination. By the time she realized what I was building, it would be too late. And that thought made the ache in my muscles worth it. By the time I finished the second week of construction, the cinder block fortress had grown into something impressive. Staggered tiers created a jagged silhouette along the driveway, iron gates gleaming in the sun, and the walls rising high enough to block anyone from peering over. I had even installed small observation slits just for fun, so I could keep an eye on anyone daring to approach. Karen didn't take long to notice. She arrived one morning in her usual dramatic fashion, clipboard clutched like a shield, eyes widening as she took in the sight. What is this?" she stammered, pointing at the fortress. This is not allowed. You're violating HOA codes. You can't just..." I leaned casually against a post, sipping my coffee. "Oh, I can," I said, smiling. "This is my property. Every inch. And I like my privacy." She flinched. "But the design, the height, this is completely unacceptable." I shrugged. "Hedges were cut down. Blocks are sturdier." Her face went from outrage to disbelief to pure, unrestrained fury in less than 10 seconds. I could see the gears turning in her mind, emails, HOA complaints, neighborhood gossip, but none of it mattered here. Not when solid concrete and iron gates stood between her and my property. Over the next few days, her attacks escalated. She sent threatening letters, called HOA meetings, and even tried to organize a community intervention to get me to tear down the fortress. Every attempt failed spectacularly. I documented everything, laughing as I filed each complaint under Karen's increasingly ridiculous antics. Neighbors began taking notice. Some secretly filmed her tantrums, sharing snippets of her outrage with others in the community. Whispers of, "Did you see Karen today?" became common. Meanwhile, I continued to work on the fortress, adding decorative stonework and reinforced corners. Every new layer of concrete felt like a triumph, a silent message to Karen. Rules don't apply to her whims when they cross personal boundaries. One morning, she tried to march down my driveway, heels clicking, arms waving frantically. I stood behind the iron gates, waving politely. "Good morning, Karen," I called cheerfully. She froze, glaring. You can't do this. I'm calling the authorities.
Please do, I said.
Just make sure they know this is private property and that your complaints are creative interpretations of HOA rules. By this point, the neighbors were watching from a distance, some laughing quietly behind curtains, others nodding in approval. Karen's fury had become a neighborhood spectacle, and my fortress had become a symbol. One person's overreach versus solid, immovable boundaries. That evening, I poured myself a drink, sat on the porch, and admired the fortress. The blocks gleamed in the sunset, sturdy and unyielding. Karen's emails pinged repeatedly in my inbox, each more absurd than the last. And I smiled. She had no idea what was coming next.